Ethan Miller didn't move to the suburbs for community. He moved for peace. His backyard was his sanctuary, a meticulously kept landscape anchored by a shimmering 20,000-gallon in-ground pool. For 3 years, it had been his silent sapphire jewel, a reward for long hours and a high-stress job in the city. For the last 3 months, it had been a public water park for the neighborhood's 2 most entitled, unsupervised terrors, the 8-year-old twin sons of Brenda Hayes, who lived 2 doors down. The problem wasn't merely the trespassing. It was the sheer arrogant assumption of access. It started subtly. A rogue baseball landing on his deck, a quick apology, from the kid, not the mother, and a request to retrieve it. Then it was waiting in the shallow end, just to cool off. Now, it was a daily, mid-afternoon occupation. Ethan stood at his kitchen window, his jaw clenched so tight he felt a muscle twitch near his temple. Through the heat haze, he watched Liam and Noah, identical pockets of chaos in bright, mismatched swim shorts, cannonballing into his deep end. The splashback hit the window with an audible thwack. His stomach twisted not just from anger, but from the knot of liability. If one of them drowned, and they were reckless enough to manage it, he was ruined. His sanctuary would become his ruin. He grabbed a worn pair of slides and marched out onto the deck. The sudden silence from the twins was the only warning he needed. They froze mid-float, wide eyes fixing on him. "You need to get out," Ethan said, his voice level, deliberate, and entirely without the warmth he usually reserved for his neighborly interactions. Liam, the bolder one, treaded water. "Mom said it's fine, Mr. Miller. She said the sun is too hot for anyone to be selfish about water." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "I don't care what your mom said. This is private property. Get out of the pool now, and then go home." Noah scrambled for the ladder, but Liam lingered. "We just finished our popsicles." He gestured vaguely toward the edge. Ethan followed the gaze. 2 discarded wooden popsicle sticks were floating near the skimmer, melting pink goo bleeding into the clean water. That was the final insult to his meticulous maintenance schedule. "Get out!" Ethan's voice dropped, carrying a dangerous, low authority that finally spurred Liam into action. They fled, leaving a trail of wet footprints across his meticulously cleaned slate patio. 5 minutes later, Ethan was standing on Brenda Hayes' front porch, the afternoon sun unforgiving. He didn't bother knocking. He just rang the bell and waited. Brenda, a woman whose entire persona seemed to be built around a perpetually annoyed sigh and an air of managerial superiority, opened the door, her oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Ethan, to what do I owe this visit?" she asked, her tone heavy with the implication that he was wasting her precious time. "Your boys were in my pool again. Uninvited," Ethan stated, cutting straight to the core. Brenda waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, the pool." "Yes, well, it's hot." "They're children." "That's what pools are for, Ethan. Being the only one on the street with one, it's a shared resource, really. Think of the liability if one of them overheats. It is not a shared resource. It is mine, and my liability increases tenfold every time they trespass. I have asked you before, Brenda. I have posted no trespassing signs. I found popsicle sticks dissolving in my skimmer today." Brenda rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God, popsicle sticks? The horror. You're making a spectacle out of 2 sweet little boys having fun. You know this neighborhood is supposed to be friendly. You're coming across as aggressive." "I'm coming across as a homeowner protecting his property and his finances," Ethan countered, his voice steady despite the heat of his anger. "This is my last polite warning. If I see your children in my pool again, I will involve the police for trespassing." Brenda's posture straightened, the friendly veneer dropping instantly. "The police? Over a swimming pool? You wouldn't dare." "You know, people talk, Ethan, and I'm friends with half the HOA board. You start causing trouble, people might just start noticing those overgrown hedges on your north side, or maybe your fence is 2 inches too tall. Harmony, Ethan. Community harmony is key. Don't ruin it over a little water." She slammed the door before he could reply, the finality of the sound echoing his own defeat. He had tried diplomacy. He had received dismissal and a thinly veiled threat. He walked back to his house feeling violated, not just by the trespassing, but by her casual confidence that she could dictate the use of his private property through social leverage. He walked past the sparkling blue water, now looking less like a jewel and more like a shimmering, gaping maw of legal danger. The liability was killing him. The entitlement was infuriating him. He sat down heavily on a patio chair, running scenarios through his mind. Higher fence? More cameras? Aggressive sprinklers? All temporary fixes for a permanent problem, Brenda Hayes. Then a cold, absurdly expensive thought settled in his mind. If the pool was the magnet, the invitation, the source of the conflict, what if the pool simply ceased to exist? The next morning, Ethan was on the phone with 3 separate concrete demolition and excavation companies, not for a repair, but for a permanent structural removal. He didn't want it filled with dirt. He wanted the shell removed and the area restored to lawn. It was an extravagant, financially punishing, and deeply satisfying form of self-defense. It's an in-ground pool, 20 feet by 40 feet, reinforced concrete, Ethan explained to the contractor, a burly man named Gus who looked skeptical. I want the whole thing gone, demolished, hauled away, and the whole filled with structural grade backfill, topped with 3 inches of topsoil. Gus whistled, low and long. That's a big job, friend. Easier to just fill it, cap it? No, I want it gone. Completely. I want 0 evidence a pool was ever there in 6 weeks. Gus named a price. It was astronomical, easily a third of the pool's original cost, but Ethan didn't even flinch. When can you start? We can start the demolition next Monday. It'll take 3 days just to break up the shell and haul it out. Ethan paid the deposit that afternoon. He kept the entire operation a complete secret, even from his closest friends, treating the decision like a private, necessary surgical procedure. The following Monday morning, at precisely 7 a.m., the peaceful suburban quiet was shattered by the rhythmic, teeth-rattling chug-chug-chug of a massive diesel engine, followed by the high-decibel, piston-driven bam-bam-bam of a hydraulic jackhammer mounted on an excavator. Brenda Hayes, notoriously a late riser, stumbled out onto her patio 5 minutes later. Still in a silk robe and holding a mug, her face a mask of furious indignation. She saw the bright yellow equipment. She saw Gus and his crew, hard-hatted and serious, standing next to Ethan, who was supervising with the calm, focused intensity of a field marshal. And she saw the excavator's steel arm plunging, blade first, into the turquoise water of the deep end. The noise was deafening, the vibrations shaking the windows on both sides of the street. Neighbors emerged from their homes, some curious, others annoyed, all watching the spectacle of suburban warfare unfolding in Ethan Miller's backyard. Brenda walked quickly, her silk robe flapping, her face a deepening shade of scarlet. She stopped at the edge of Ethan's property, the rope separating their yard suddenly feeling like a canyon. "Ethan, what in God's name are you doing?" she shrieked, struggling to be heard over the destruction. Ethan turned, a faint, almost pitying smile touching the corner of his mouth. He walked closer, pausing only when the noise level dropped slightly as the operator shifted the machine. "I'm exercising my rights as a property owner." "Brenda," Ethan said, his voice calm, polite, and louder than necessary. "I'm having my pool removed." "Removed? You can't. It's a pool. It adds value. It's ridiculous." She was gesticulating wildly, her coffee sloshing over the side of the mug. "It's my pool, Brenda. I can do whatever I want with it." I found that I was being forced to choose between the anxiety of a massive legal liability, one that you were actively facilitating, and my own peace. I chose peace. And this, Brenda, is the only way to guarantee it. But the boys! Where are the boys going to swim now? They look forward to this. You know how hot it gets. You are destroying a neighborhood asset just to be petty. You are taking away their fun. Her voice cracked with genuine self-righteous outrage. They're going to swim in a public pool, or a relative's pool, or any pool that is not mine, Ethan replied, his expression hardening. He turned back to Gus. Back to work, Gus. Let's finish that deep end. The jackhammer roared back to life, a symphony of destruction. Brenda stood there, paralyzed, watching as the excavator finished its arc. The sound of the blade biting into concrete and steel rebar a sickening final sound. The last of the turquoise water was violently displaced, splashing out onto the lawn, revealing the shattered gray-white shell beneath. She didn't know how to fight this. She could fight an accusation, a noise complaint, or a disagreement over the fence line. She could threaten his standing in the HOA, but she couldn't fight a man who had chosen to destroy tens of thousands of dollars of his own property just to keep her out. The audacity, the finality of the act, choked her intended verbal assault. She watched, silent for a long moment, as the giant claw grasped a jagged chunk of the pool deck, a section she had stood on just days earlier while issuing her threat, and dropped it with a tremendous crash-int. The silence that followed the departure of Gus's crew was not peaceful. It was heavy, pregnant with expectation. The vast rectangular scar in Ethan's backyard was now a flat, perfectly graded expanse of dark, rich topsoil, waiting for the turf that would officially erase the pool's existence. It was a victory, but a costly one, financially and emotionally. He had paid for peace in 6 figures. Now he just had to wait for Brenda Hayes to collect the debt. The new security camera, mounted high on the corner of the garage, blinked with a cold, red eye, watching everything. Ethan had paid extra for the industrial model, high resolution, night vision, and tamper-proof, and had run the feeds to a dedicated monitor in his home office. It was no longer a security feature. It was his war room surveillance system. Brenda's counterattack didn't come with another shriek over the fence. It came in the mail, precisely 5 days after the pool was filled. The first letter was from the Heritage Oaks Homeowners Association, HOA, a thick envelope demanding immediate attention. Ethan opened it to find not 1 but 3 simultaneous complaints, all filed on the same day by a single anonymous source. The complaints were meticulously petty. Violation 4.3b, noise ordinance, citing the 3 days of excessive, unmitigated noise disturbance from heavy machinery, the pool demolition, demanding a $500 fine and a formal letter of apology to the immediate neighbors. Violation 6.1a, perimeter barrier, claiming Ethan's decorative split-rail fence, facing the adjacent walking path, was in disrepair and the posts were leaning slightly to the east, giving an arbitrary 14-day deadline for repair, or replacement violation 2.9d, unapproved home improvement, suggesting the removal of an in-ground pool, a structural amenity, required prior architectural review board, ARB approval, which Ethan had not obtained, and threatening an injunction on any further landscaping until the matter was resolved. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. Brenda hadn't just filed the complaints. She had weaponized the HOA's bureaucracy, digging up obscure, rarely enforced bylaws to create maximum friction. It was a chess move, and he was ready to play. He typed out his responses, keeping copies of everything. To the noise ordinance, he attached copies of the county permits for the demolition, along with a note that read, "The noise, while regrettable, was contained within the HOA approved. Hours of operation 7 a.m., 4 p.m., and was required to remove a potential liability that was being actively exacerbated by the unsupervised trespassing of neighbor children. Furthermore, I would like to formally request the HOA review the countless noise complaints filed against the resident at 1442 Elderberry Lane, Brenda Hayes, for unapproved late-night pool parties hosted in previous summers, which far exceeded community quiet hours." To the fence repair. He had already photographed the fence before and after the complaint. He included a photo of the leaning post, perfectly straight, and a quotation from a fencing company stating the structure was sound. To the ARB violation. This was the trickiest. He consulted his original closing documents. A clause stated that structural additions required ARB approval, but structural removals only required municipal permits, which he had. He attached the city's demolition permit, effectively nullifying her claim. He hand-delivered the packet of replies to the HOA office himself, ensuring every detail was documented and stamped with the date. He wouldn't just comply. He would fight fire with paperwork. Brenda, meanwhile, maintained a facade of serene superiority. She would stand on her front porch, watering a small potted plant, but her eyes, hidden behind the reflective mirror of her sunglasses, would track Ethan's every move. When he received a delivery of sod to cover the former pool area, she didn't say a word, but 2 days later, the delivery driver who brought his new landscaping timber claimed his tires had been inexplicably slashed while parked on the street near Ethan's property line. No proof, just an expensive, frustrating inconvenience. The real escalation came when Ethan began phase 2 of his plan, the erection of a new garden structure where the deep end used to be. It wasn't a fence, but a tall, multi-layered pergola designed to support climbing vines, a structure that would eventually reach 9 feet in height, completely blocking the view from Brenda's house into his yard. On the 3rd day of construction, Ethan took a necessary break, leaving a stack of expensive cedar planks resting near the edge of the newly laid sod. When he returned from the house 15 minutes later, the air was still, but the scent of salt was unmistakable. Ethan's heart began to pound with a cold dread. He walked slowly to the site. The topsoil around the perimeter of the new structure had been deliberately heavily salted, a desperate, malevolent attempt to destroy the newly laid grass and render the ground infertile for the climbing vines. Beside the patch, he saw 2 small, distinct footprints sinking into the damp earth, too small to belong to an adult. He didn't need to check the security feed, but he did anyway. He rewound the footage on his office monitor. There they were, Liam and Noah, clad in innocuous-looking t-shirts and shorts, giggling as they carried 2 large, open bags of rock salt, the kind used for water softeners, from their own yard, across the property line, and dumped the contents with zealous, childish malice directly onto the soil. They were Brenda's foot soldiers, and she had clearly instructed them on their mission of petty destruction. This was no longer a dispute over trespassing. This was intentional property damage facilitated by the parent. This was his opening. Ethan saved the high-resolution video clip immediately, backing it up to an external drive. He waited until 5:00 p.m., the time of maximum suburban visibility, and called the local non-emergency police line to file a report for vandalism and property damage. The police officer, a weary man named Officer Rodriguez, took the report. When he walked over to Brenda's house to speak with her, Ethan watched from his window. Brenda met the officer on her porch, her expression shifting instantly from casual annoyance to bewildered innocence. She spoke rapidly, her hands fluttering dismissively, and pointed directly at Ethan's newly installed camera. The conversation ended quickly, and Officer Rodriguez left, promising Ethan a copy of the incident report. 30 minutes later, the HOA manager, Mrs. Klein, called Ethan. Her voice was strained. "Mr. Miller, I'm afraid this is going to escalate," she sighed. "Brenda Hayes just called the board president claiming you are engaging in surveillance of her children. She says your camera is pointed directly at their bedroom window, which, according to her, is a violation of privacy statutes. She's demanding its immediate removal." "Mrs. Klein," Ethan replied, his voice calm, "my camera is pointed directly at the $15,000 worth of landscaping I just installed on my property, which was just vandalized with rock salt by her children. I have the video evidence, time-stamped, of their deliberate property damage. I filed a police report 30 minutes ago. The camera stays, and I suggest the board review the video evidence before siding with her." The tension broke the following Tuesday with an emergency HOA board meeting, held in the drab beige conference room of the community clubhouse. The room was packed. Brenda had mobilized her allies, 2 older couples who sympathized with the poor deprived children, and another neighbor who simply disliked Ethan's aggressive renovation. Brenda spoke first, standing before the 5-member board with an air of tragic victimhood. She didn't mention the pool directly, framing her grievance instead as a matter of neighborly bullying. "This man," she said, nodding dramatically toward Ethan, "destroyed his own pool, a community amenity, out of pure spite. And now he is harassing my children. He installed a massive, unsightly camera that monitors my property, violating our family's right to privacy. He is an aggressive, vindictive man who wants to turn our friendly street into a hostile fortress. We just want him to remove the camera and stop escalating this feud." A smattering of sympathetic murmurs followed. The board president, a nervous man named David, cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, the optics of the situation are difficult. Destroying the pool was extreme, and while within your rights, it has caused friction. The board is inclined to ask you to reposition your camera to ease the tension." Ethan stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He reached into his briefcase and placed a small USB drive on the table. "Before you make a motion, David, I'd like you to review the actual facts," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the stuffy silence. "I removed my pool at massive personal expense to remove a dangerous liability that was being actively, knowingly exploited by Mrs. Hayes in defiance of multiple warnings. I have the transcripts of my attempts at peaceful resolution. I have the receipts for the demolition. I have the permits." He paused, letting the documents sink in. "And as for the camera, it is pointed solely at my backyard to monitor my property, which is my legal right. Here is the reason it was installed." Ethan plugged the USB into the projector's laptop. The screen flickered, and then the crystal-clear, time-stamped video of Liam and Noah gleefully salting his fresh topsoil began to play. The sounds of the children's laughter, bright, innocent, and now deeply sinister, filled the silence of the conference room. The video lasted 45 seconds, ending as the boys sprinted back toward their own yard, leaving the lethal white residue behind. A horrified Sile,